Hey everyone, welcome to lesson number 1 on project-based learning. This is going to expose you a little bit to what PBL is so that we can really get engaged in creating our own projects. So you can kind of sit back, relax a little bit, get a cup of coffee, have a notepad and a pen handy if you want to jot down notes, but there's also going to be some information below this video for where you can get further resources. So without further ado, let's look at project-based learning, lesson 1. So first off, what you're going to learn in this particular lecture is first, what is project-based learning? We're going to look at a couple of examples of project-based learning and give a working definition of it. What's the history of project-based learning? We're going to look a little bit at the history of project-based learning. How did we get to project-based learning to where it is now? And how we built on really the backs of some giants who stood before us in education. Third, who are some of its major proponents? So who are some people who really were strong advocates for PBL? And finally, fourth, what are some of the effects of project-based learning on student learning? I know that we have some of you folks out there who are data folks, and you really want to know what's the data out there and the impact that it really has on student learning. So we're going to provide that for you. Okay, so let's get right into it. What is PBL? Now, rather than me giving you a working definition of project-based learning, let's first look at what are some examples of what project-based learning does. First off, this is an example. It helps students to collaborate with each other to really accomplish a shared task. These are some students who are designing an aquaponics food growing system for response to a food production issue. Second, project-based learning is something that really gets kids to work on designing together and design solutions and really helps tap into that creative brain of theirs. This is some students, again, drawing up some plans for a project. It also helps to individualize learning for students. So project-based learning is something that really allows students to pursue their passions and have choice and make meaning of their learning. This is a student creating a bamboo bicycle as part of a challenge to think of some alternate transportation mechanisms. Next, project-based learning, again, helps students to communicate their knowledge. This is a student communicating his knowledge to another student regarding some of the robotics and programming things he had learned. Another thing is it helps students develop leadership skills. So project-based learning is really a strategy to help you develop leadership capacities in your students. Here's some students presenting one of their solutions for a pressing question about food production to the whole entire class. Project-based learning also is an opportunity for students to step outside of the classroom and get into the real world and actually make some differences and participate in the kind of work that adults would do. So let's give you the scholarly definition. Again, I reverse engineered that, kind of like what I like to do. Let's keep it simple though. What is a definition that wraps up all those things? Project-based learning is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time. Again, this is an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, complex question, problem, or challenge. So all those things that you saw were students responding to this complex question, problem, or challenge. Okay, and it's really an opportunity for students to get deeper into learning. Now let's look to see PBL, a brief history. How did project-based learning come about? And who are some of its major proponents? So we're going to look at all the way back to 3000 BCE. That's right, folks. We're going to look all the way back to the ancient Greeks, all the way to modern day, and really where's the future of project-based learning going? So we'll start with really the kind of viewpoint put forth by Socrates. Socrates, of course, was famous for the Socratic method of questioning and answering. He would never give students a direct answer to a question. Instead, he would encourage further questioning. So that kind of has its roots in project-based learning with open-ended tasks. So that was 3000 BCE with Socrates. Now I'm going to skip, and we're going all the way to the 20th century by a man named John Dewey. John Dewey is a grandfather of education. He is a pillar, an absolute giant, and he really has this constructivist view that really students should be coming up with their own meaning and making sense of learning for themselves. In addition to John Dewey, you have Montessori as well, and the Montessori school of thought is very popular and prominent. If you are a Montessori school teacher or you're a Montessori school leader, you probably know this philosophy, but she is very much into exploratory types of learning, an inquiry-based type model, again, very open-ended, and that students are coming up with making meaning themselves. So that's early 1900s with John Dewey and Montessori. Now, we also have Piaget, who Piaget comes a little later in the 20th century, and he's a German philosopher who also argues for this constructivist type of viewpoint for education and really students being engaged in the process of learning themselves. So that's the mid-1900s Piaget. Now that we have those basic tenets, we're going to look at what are some of the very first project-based learning schools. And of course, you have High Tech High. The famous school features on Most Likely to Succeed, which is a school that was a partnership between industry, Qualcomm specifically, and some school leaders who really wanted to develop a different narrative for schooling. Kids were coming out of school not ready to integrate into the real world and into the job-specific fields, and so this is a way to meet that, and they built off of the understanding they had in the past. Now, High Tech High borrowed a lot from this school of thought called expeditionary learning. Now, expeditionary learning is made famous by Ron Berger. Ron Berger was a school teacher who engaged his students into expeditionary types of learning opportunities where they were exploring content and exploring answers to real world problems and doing really deep investigations. Okay, and that's the 1990s. Now, I want to deconstruct for you some of the myths around project-based learning so we can have a really solid foundation and basis for moving forward with project-based learning ourselves. Now, the first myth regarding project-based learning is that project-based learning decreases students' cognitive ability. In other words, it's not rigorous enough. And that's completely false. In fact, project-based learning has a dramatic effect on student learning. Students at project-based learning schools as compared to students who are not at project-based learning schools, they found a marked difference in their problem-solving ability, especially with open-ended math problems. And with the way in which the content and curriculum is moving in the 21st century, what better way than to engage students than through actual real-world projects? Students are also showing very high ability in terms of their communication and collaboration abilities and abilities to really, again, solve these more open-ended problems, which we know is going to be necessary. Myth number 2, project-based learning is for the gifted students. Now, I taught at Futures Academy, and every time we would feature our work for an audience, people said, are these the gifted students? In fact, we had a higher percentage of learning support students than any other classroom at our school. And that's because what project-based learning does is it promotes equity, right? It gives students a boost up so that they can have an equal playing field when it comes to the project tasks. There's multiple ways in which students can demonstrate their knowledge, and that specifically is reaching a large amount of your learners, not just the gifted learners, because sometimes the gifted learners struggle even more. It's for all learners. Myth number 3, project-based learning is too hard to implement. Now, I'm not going to say it's easy to implement. I'm just going to say with this video and these series of videos, I think it's going to be a lot easier for you to implement. But it is definitely not too hard to implement. It's not where you just set students loose and you say go, and it's that open-ended. No, you really provide students a timeline, a framework, guidepost to get to what those project tasks are. So it's not too hard to implement. In fact, what it does is it increases teachers' efficacy. Whereas lots of teachers think they can reach maybe half of their class, project-based learning provides teachers with the ability to reach almost all their students, and it actually uplifts them and makes them realize they can implement this. 4th, project-based learning leads to chaotic classrooms. We all have that vision of the chaotic classroom where we set students loose, we haven't set forth a clear learning goals and clear learning objectives, and students are hanging out the windows. I've had the nightmares before. I'm here to assure you that's not going to happen with a well-designed project. In fact, what it's going to do, it's actually going to increase your attendance and decrease your discipline issues. And there's a difference between a chaotic classroom and an engaged classroom. Students that are in an engaged classroom are going to be working at various tasks, and it's going to feel a little different, but it's actually going to increase their participation and increase your ability to connect to those students. Okay, you can access the study. There's a study below by following this link that I put below. Below, you're going to find some actual data related to what it does for student learning. Okay, now that was a brief 10-minute video. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you feel solid on the foundations to know that project-based learning is going to have a dramatic effect on your student learning. There's some resources right below this video that are going to help you out. and I will see you in the next video, which we're going to discuss what are the key components of a good project-based experience.